Assalamu alaikum everyone. In this lesson we are going to talk about various tests that we use to identify various types of cations, various types of anions and various gases. So first thing we need to know, this is mostly a chapter based on cramming. You need to just cram these tests and the observations and their observations, and the results. Okay, now I'll try to make it a bit easier for you, because if you just look in the book, they'll give you a table which is very hard to remember. So I'm going to draw a flow chart that will help you identify that will help you actually memorize various tests. So the first thing that we are going to do is we are going to identify various cations. The first topic is identification of cations. Identification of cations. Okay, now we can identify cations with two solutions. One is sodium hydroxide and the other one is aqueous ammonia. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we are going to use sodium hydroxide. So I had a solution. Let's say I had a random solution which contains a cation that I don't know. Okay, I added 5 drops of NaOH. Whenever you add 5 drops of NaOH in a solution, there are 3 possibilities. They can be white precipitates. Okay. Then there can be colored precipitates. And then there can be no precipitates or no reaction. Okay. If white precipitates appear, so the potential cations can be aluminium, zinc, lead, and calcium. Okay. As far as colors are concerned, colors can be split into blue, green, and red. Okay, now you added 5 drops of NaOH. There can be 3 possibilities: white precipitates, colored, and no reaction. If they are white precipitates, then it can be all these 4 of the ions. Okay, now we are going to do what? To further shortlist the ion that a solution can contain, we will add excess NaOH. Excess sodium hydroxide. I added excess sodium hydroxide. Initially I only added 5 drops. Okay, now there are going to be 2 possibilities over here. Either these ions going to dissolve, either they are going to be soluble in excess or they are going to be insoluble in excess. Okay, most of them are soluble in excess. Only calcium is insoluble in excess. Aluminium, zinc, and lead are soluble in excess. Okay, similar goes with the colored precipitates as well. I added excess NaOH. There can be 2 possibilities. Okay, they can be soluble in excess and they can be insoluble in excess. Among the colored precipitates, first we need to know the colored precipitates. Let me just write it down. If the color precipitate that appears is blue, it is going to be copper ions. If the color that appears is green, it is iron plus 2 ion. If it is red, it is iron plus 3 ion. Okay, then I added excess NaOH. So again, 2 possibilities: either these ions will be soluble in excess or insoluble in excess. Okay, so all of them are actually insoluble in excess. Copper, iron, and iron 3, all of them are insoluble in excess. Nothing is soluble in excess. Okay, and going back to the first step, I said that if there is no reaction, it suggests the presence of ammonium ion. And how do you confirm the presence of ammonium ion? You heat it. You heat the solution. When you heat the solution, ammonia is released, because we know that the ammonium salt, when reacts with an alkali, releases ammonia on heating. So when you heat it, ammonia is released, and ammonia turns red litmus blue. So that's how you know that that a particular solution contains ammonium ion. So I'm going to just repeat all of it again. Acha, to test for cations, I added 5 drops of NaOH. There are 3 possibilities. They can be white precipitates, colored, or no reaction. If there are white precipitates, there can be 4 cations: aluminium, zinc, lead, and calcium. If there are colored precipitates, there can be 3 possible colors: blue, green, and red. Okay, if it's blue, it's copper. If it's green, it's iron plus 2. If it's red, it's iron plus 3. Again, the third possibility was no reaction. So, no reaction suggests the presence of ammonium ion, and you can confirm it by heating it. You heat it, ammonia is released, and if it turns red, it must blue. You know that the solution contained ammonium ion. Okay, going back, you just added 5 drops here, and then you have to add excess NaOH. When you add excess NaOH, there is going to be 2 possibilities: whether these ions, these cations can be soluble, or these cations will be insoluble. Among these cations, calcium is insoluble, and all the other ions are soluble. Okay. Moving on to the colored precipitates, you added excess NaOH. Again, there are going to be 2 possibilities: soluble in excess or insoluble in excess. All the colored precipitates in NaOH are insoluble in excess. Okay. Now we are going to use ammonia to identify cations. It's pretty much the same. You just need to tweak a few details. Let's tweak a few details. Okay. Okay. Now let's change it to ammonia. Mm, mm, let's change it to ammonia. Possibilities are going to remain the same. Calcium is not here anymore. If there is no reaction, if there is a possibility that it is calcium. Okay. Some of the details I have to write again, but the basic template remains the same. Okay. So I added 5 drops of aqueous ammonia here. Aqueous ammonia. Again, there are 3 possibilities: white precipitates, colored, and no reaction. If the white precipitate, now as opposed to sodium hydroxide, calcium does not appear here. Calcium will appear here. Okay. If there is no reaction, there is possibility that the ion is calcium. Okay. And then you dissolve them in excess. Then you add excess NaOH. Again, there are 2 possibilities. Okay. Only zinc dissolves. Only zinc dissolves. Only zinc is soluble. Rest of them are insoluble. Pb plus 2 and aluminium plus 3 is insoluble. And as far as these colored precipitates are concerned, only copper dissolves. Only copper dissolves to form dark blue solution. Only copper dissolves to form dark blue solution. Okay, iron plus 2 and iron plus 3 remain insoluble in excess. Okay, so that's how you test the presence of cations using aqueous ammonia. Now let's test for anions. Let's test for anions. Testing for anions. How many anions are there? So there are carbonates. Testing for carbonates. Testing for chlorides. Testing for iodide. Testing for iodide. Testing for sulfate. Testing for sulfates, and then testing for nitrates. All of them have very different tests. For carbonate, you will add an acid. You will add a dilute acid. Okay. You add a dilute acid. We know that when metal carbonates react with acids, they release carbon dioxide. So you add an acid. That would be the test. Test would be to add an acid, and observation would be, we know that when carbon dioxide is released, observation would be effervescence. Effervescence, which means bubbling. Okay. For chlorides, the test would be the addition of, you'll have to add nitric acid, and silver nitrate. Okay, if there is a chloride in here, silver will react with that chloride and form silver chloride. And we know silver chloride has a white precipitates. So observation would be white precipitates. White precipitates. For iodide again you need to add HNO3. You need to add HNO3, but in this case you will add lead nitrate. You will add, instead of silver nitrate, you will add lead nitrate. In this case you will add lead nitrate, and the observation would be this lead will react with this iodide and will form the precipitates of lead iodide, and which are yellow precipitates. The yellow precipitates of lead iodide are formed. That is the observation. Okay, what about sulfates? For sulfates, the test, again you add HNO3, and with that you add barium nitrate. You add barium nitrate because we know that barium sulfate or baso also produce a precipitate. So observation would be white precipitates of barium sulfate. White precipitates of barium sulfate. For nitrate, it is a bit different. You have to introduce. Okay, let me write nitrate. For nitrates, the test would be you will add aqueous sodium hydroxide. You will add aqueous sodium hydroxide, NaOH, aqueous, that is the test, and aluminium foil, and aluminium, and then you will heat it. Okay, you will add sodium hydroxide and aluminium, and you will heat it, and the result would be, observation would be, ammonia is produced. And how do you know that ammonia is produced? It will turn red litmus paper blue. Red litmus paper blue. Okay, just need to revise it. So for carbonates you add an acid. It's pretty easy to remember that effervescence is there. For chloride, iodide and sulfate, all three of them are going to have nitric acid in the test. For chloride you will add silver nitrate, because by adding silver nitrate, okay, silver is going to react with chloride. We know that white precipitate of silver chloride is formed. You already know this. Even the sulfate, you already know this, that you add nitric acid and then you add barium nitrate, which will form barium sulfate, and it will show white precipitate. So you know that the solution has some sulfates. Only for iodide you need to remember that you will have to add lead nitrate along with nitric acid. You will only have to add lead nitrate along with nitric acid and it will form yellow precipitate. You just need to remember this and this. The rest of it is pretty easy to remember. It's not that difficult. For nitrate you have to add sodium hydroxide and aluminium foil and heat it, and ammonia is released, which turns red litmus paper blue. That is the observation. Okay, so that was the test for anions. Let's talk about test for gases. Test for gases. Okay, so let's talk about carbon dioxide first. What is the test for carbon dioxide? It turns lime water milky, but what does it pass through? We actually we can say gives white precipitate with lime water, or you can just say that it turns lime water milky. You pass it through lime water, that will turn milky. What does that mean? It means when you pass it through calcium hydroxide, calcium carbonate is formed, which has white precipitate. So when we say that we are turning lime water milky, milky means that the precipitates of calcium carbonate is formed when carbon dioxide reacts with lime water. So that's why it looks like that the lime water has turned milky. Okay, let's talk about hydrogen. So hydrogen produces a pop sound with a lighted splint. It produces a pop sound with lighted splint. Okay, and then you have oxygen. Oxygen relights a glowing splint. Oxygen relights a glowing splint. Relights a glowing splint. They are their test as well as their observation. The test would be you will use a lighted splint, and the observation would be to produce a pop sound. What is lighted splint? It means that lit matchstick. Splint means matchstick, something that is burning. Okay, that's the lighted splint. And for O2, the test would be you will use a glowing splint, and the observation would be the glowing splint would be relighted. Okay. Okay, now this is a test for chlorine. Okay, how do you do that? It bleaches damp litmus paper white. It bleaches damp litmus paper white. That's what bleaches means. You turn something white. Okay, now you have ammonia. You already know that ammonia's test is it turns red litmus paper blue. It turns damp red litmus paper blue. Litmus paper blue. Okay. There's another one that is sulfur dioxide. Now sulfur dioxide it turns acidified potassium dichromate orange to green. It turns potassium dichromate orange to green. The changing of potassium dichromate from orange to green is means that potassium dichromate is getting reduced, which means that SO2 must be a reducing agent. Okay, so these are the tests for gases. That's all you need to remember from this chapter. There are tests for cations, there are tests for anions, and then they are testing for gases. Okay, and there's also one thing, there's a test for water as well. There's a test for the presence of water as well. So how do you do that? There is a compound known as anhydrous copper sulfate. Anhydrous copper sulfate. What does that mean? Anhydrous, it means that which does not have any water of crystallization attached to it. Anhydrous copper sulfate. Anhydrous copper sulfate is basically simple copper sulfate without any water. Okay. Copper sulfate actually turns blue. We know that copper sulfate is blue, but anhydrous copper sulfate is actually white. It turns blue because of the presence of water. Now you can use this color change to identify the presence of water in a particular in a sample. For example, what would be the test? The test would be you'll use anhydrous copper sulfate. Anhydrous copper sulfate. And what would be the observation if the test is positive? If you drop a solution, if you drop a drop of sample, I'm dropping a drop of sample which we think may have water, which we are testing for water. We dropped it on an anhydrous copper sulfate. If it contained water, the place where that drop actually appears on the surface of anhydrous copper sulfate will turn blue. It will turn from white to blue. Okay, if there is water in that sample. If there is no water in that sample, anhydrous copper sulfate will remain white. So that is actually the test for water. That's all from the testing. Now let's do some past paper questions. Most of the past paper questions related to identification of cations, anions and gases usually appear in paper 4 exams. Okay, and let's do some paper 4 questions. Okay, let's do this past paper questions from paper 2016 May-June. Okay, so L is dissolved in water and the resulting solution is divided into 3 parts for tests. B, C and D. L is not a compound of a transition metal. If it's not a compound of a transition metal, then the observation would be a colorless solution. Okay, a colorless solution. If L was a compound of a transition metal, it would have been a colored solution. Okay, now to the first part, aqueous sodium hydroxide is added until a change is seen, and the conclusion is that these ions can be present. For these ions, what would be the observations? All of these ions show white precipitates. White precipitates. Okay, now you added excess sodium hydroxide, and when you added excess sodium hydroxide, they're saying that aluminium and zinc ions are present. What would be the observation? Both of these ions are actually soluble in excess. Are soluble in excess when you use sodium hydroxide for testing. Only calcium ion is insoluble in excess. Okay, moving on. Now to the second part, aqueous ammonia is added until a change is seen. Okay, now these two ions are present in aqueous ammonia. They also have white precipitates. White precipitates. If only aluminium ions are present, we know that in excess ammonia, aluminium ions are insoluble in excess. Only zinc ions are soluble in excess. Rest of the white precipitates are insoluble in excess. So you will write insoluble in excess. Insoluble in excess. So that is the short listing of it. Okay. To the first part you added this, and then you added this, then you added this, and then you added this. Now the conclusion says that L contains iodide ions. What would be the test for iodide ions? You add HNO3 and you add lead nitrate. Okay, and what would be the observation for this? Yellow precipitates of lead iodide can be seen. Yellow precipitates of lead iodide can be seen. Do not write PPT, only write precipitates, the full form of it. Okay. Now conclusion, the formula of L is the aluminum ions were present and the iodide ions, combine them together, you will have Ali3, aluminium iodide. Okay. Referring to the test C2, what change in observation is seen if zinc 2 ions are present instead of aluminium plus 3 ions? It's asking you if zinc plus 2 ions are present instead of aluminium plus 3. What would be the observation? Zinc ions are soluble in excess when you are testing with ammonia. So zinc ions are soluble in excess. The observation would have been soluble in excess. Okay, so these are the type of questions that are tested in exams. Hopefully you got the gist of it. Inshallah, I'll be back with another lesson. Okay, until then, take a lot of care of yourself. I'll see you again then. Allah Hafiz.